Hello my fellow kin, welcome back to the channel and welcome to another unit analysis video. In today's episode we'll take a look at the esteemed engineer of the kin, the Borkhyr Ironmaster. As always, we'll first discuss who they actually are, find out how to best equip them, talk about how to use them, discuss some stratagems and combos, and wrap the video up with some important considerations to keep in mind for when you decide to run this unit. But before we go any further, I want to remind you all that we do have a Discord server for the channel where you could join free of charge and interact with a growing community of like-minded Votann players. Talk tactics, share photos, and even get your models featured in my weekly videos. Now this is usually the part of the video where I showcase a painted model for the unit I'm actually discussing, but surprisingly I couldn't find any. So if you do have a picture of an Ironmaster you would like featured on the channel, now is the best time to join and share. In the meantime, here are two beautifully painted characters provided by our Discord user, Mercenary Historian. Alright, so who are the Brokhyr Ironmasters? So in the lore, these guys represent esteemed engineers among the kin who utilize their robot arsenal of ecogs and ironkin to help improve efficiency in the workshop and in the battlefield. They're known for their reliability in the products they produce, the utility they offer, and the efficiency of their creations, which is somewhat thematically represented on the tabletop. Okay, so how can you actually run these guys? Well, I put the data card up on the screen for you here, and the first thing you're going to notice is that we actually have 3 unique stat lines within this one data card. The reason for that is because by including this unit in your roster, the whole unit comes with 3 distinct stat line profiles, 3 distinct models within that unit. So the first one we have is a Borkhyr Ironmaster, the big guy himself, who comes in at movement speed 5, toughness 5, 4 up base save, 4 wounds, leadership 7, OC 1. We then have a single Ironkin assistant, his number 2, which again, same stat line here, but just half the number of wounds being down to 2. Lastly, we have 3 ECOG models. These guys have again the exact same stat line, but only 1 wound each apiece. In terms of weapon options, everything here comes stock with a default profile, which makes it really easy for me in this video. I will say it is pretty interesting that they have a Graviton rifle on the Ironmaster, which is a very similar weapon profile to the Graviton blast cannon that is equipped by the Brokhyr Thunderkin, which as you can imagine is the unit he can lead. Now in terms of abilities, we have 2. The first one is Multispectral Visor, and what this simply does is it provides him and his unit +1 to hit. The second ability, Brokhyr's Guild, states that at the end of the movement phase, if you're within 3 inches of a vehicle or an exoframe keyword model, you get to heal it D3 wounds. And if the Ironkin is still alive, you heal it 3 flat instead. All in all, for 65 points, we get a pretty nice force multiplier here who provides +1 to hit for his unit. He has the ability to heal and repair vehicles, and he provides a nice little native survivability boost to the squad because he can allocate some wounds to his ecogs and Ironkin assistants first before they go on to the unit he's leading. So the next question is, who can he actually lead? So he can only lead 1 unit at the time of this video, and that is the Brokhyr Thunderkin. As we discussed, he provides a native +1 to hit ability. However, this doesn't actually stack with a token these guys could benefit from if they're shooting a judged target. Meaning that if he is leading or if he's not, regardless of that, if you're shooting at the unit that's judged, you're still only hitting on 3s. You'll never be able to hit on 2s. It does add to the stack in theory, so if something is like stealthed, for example, and you have a token on it, well, now you will actually hit it on 3s instead of 4s because you have 2 on the stack for +1 to hit versus their -1 to hit provided by stealth. But ultimately, usually 9 out of 10 times, it simply allows the unit to operate more independently and doesn't have to rely on judgment tokens to do damage, because now with a leader attached, you're always going to hit on 3s, and if you're shooting at a vehicle, you'll always be wounding on 2s. Effectively negating having to shoot a double judged target and making anything they shoot at double judged. And then of course, as I mentioned before with the drones, you add some extra survivability as the ECOG drones will soak some really big powerful hits that would otherwise pick up a Thunderkin outright. And if it doesn't and something goes through and chips away at them, well, you can always heal it back up by D3 or 3 flat if the Ironkin is still alive. Okay, so what about running him solo? This can potentially be done. I've only seen it done once in a single competitive list, and I think the primary reason for that is because he competes with the Grimnir, who comes in at the same points cost of 65. There is a slight trade-off here with the Grimnir. He has a 4+ invulnerable save, but the Ironmaster and his squad have 3 extra wounds total. I do personally think that the 4+ invulnerable save is a little bit more valuable than the 3 extra wounds you would get. And that is probably one of the bigger reasons why people just simply run the Grimnir instead. A lot more survivability with the 4++. Now that said, if you do decide to run this guy solo, he does provide some utility. He has a slightly bigger footprint, which means you have a larger screening circle or bubble inside of your backfield. He does have the option to heal vehicles, and of course at 65 points, it's a relatively cheap option for doing actions with. Now, I think another major drawback to running this guy solo is that unlike Tech Marines, which do a very similar job for Space Marines, he doesn't have the lone op ability which would proc by being within a certain distance of a vehicle. This means that if you actually want to heal your vehicles, you somehow need to keep up with them and still stay hidden behind cover. If you can be shot, you will be shot. And I think that this is detrimental to how he's actually designed to be played. They're telling you not to run him solo because there's a higher risk of just not being able to do what you're bringing him for. So I don't actually think it's worth running this guy alone just to try to heal your vehicles, because if you have to start moving around the board, there's nothing actually keeping this guy safe other than hiding him. I think for all of these reasons, we'll typically just see people take Grimnirs instead, who do a very similar job with the intent of playing the mission and are much more survivable at a 4++. Okay, so we are going to do a little bit of math in this video, and it's primarily just to see how much value this guy actually adds to a squad of Brokhyr Thunderkin. Now, I do have a very detailed video on my channel discussing the unit analysis for the Brokhyr Thunderkin, so do check that out if you want to learn a little bit more about them. But because this is the Ironmaster's video, we're just going to take the best weapon profile for that squad and run the math on that instead. And so here on the screen, I have the ranged weapon we'll analyze being the Graviton Blast Cannon, which is equipped by the Thunderkin. It's anti-vehicle 2+, blast, 18-inch range, D6 attacks, BS4, strength 5, minus 2 AP, and 2 damage. And for this assumption, we're going to first assume that there are 0 tokens on our target, so no +1 to hit, no +1 to wound. We're going to assume that it's bare bones, so no benefit of cover or stratagems. We're going to also assume that there is no Ironmaster leading the squad, so no leader attached. We will assume that we're shooting at a vehicle, so wounding it on 2s. And of course, we'll assume that it's a 6-man unit. So plugging the numbers in with no leader on a 6-man unit of Brokhyr Thunderkin, we get a table that looks like this. I consolidated the data for what vehicle profiles would probably be seen, typically starting above toughness 5. So I just put beginning at greater than toughness 5, all the way on to whatever toughness you're at, assuming that it's a vehicle. And that's why the numbers here are basically the same for whichever sectional role you're looking at. So the first numbers I want to look at here are at the 3-up base save level. I think this is an important save characteristic to look at because most of the general average vehicles will probably fall inside of this category at being within this toughness level and being at a 3+ base save. Of course, the toughness brackets don't actually matter because we are going to always be wounding on 2s. So when we look at the 3+ base save profile characteristic, this is where we see more of the general vehicles like a Rhino here that comes in at 10 wounds, or like Armigers, for example, which are toughness 10 and have 12 wounds. And interestingly, what we see is that an unaccompanied squad, so no +1 to hit, these guys are hitting on 4s right now, wounding on 2s, will do about 11.67 damage on average to a model with a 3+ base save. And I think this is really interesting because if you consider that a Rhino has 10 wounds and Armigers have 12, that means you can pretty reliably, on average, assuming everybody rolls average, pick up one of these models with a squad of 6. No leader attached. But what happens if we throw a leader into the mix? So I ran the same exact numbers with a leader here, so now the squad is hitting on 3s instead of 4s. And what we see is that we do, as you can probably imagine, add some damage universally across the board here. If we circle back specifically to the profiles at a 3+ base save characteristic, what we see is we add about 4 damage on average to the squad by including a leader. Now the reason I said this was interesting is because if we consider some of those baseline profiles that we're thinking about, like an Armiger or a Rhino, we don't actually need a leader to kill one of those models. The only thing a leader is providing here is that extra assurance that they will be able to kill the model. So we take that damage up to 15. We know on average we're going to guarantee kill it unless we really roll poorly here. So it's just that extra assurance that we get the job done. That is the inclusion that it is providing here. That is the value you're getting. However, if we look at the 2+ base save, we see that the damage difference that we get is a little bit smaller, being at only 3 points of damage. And I think the best example that I could think of here is just imagining the 3+ target either popping Armor of Contempt or benefiting from cover, which it usually would. In this instance, we could see that the 6-man unit without a leader would only do about 8.75 damage on average, which is not quite enough to kill a Rhino or come close to killing an Armiger. However, the inclusion of a character elevates this damage by about 3, now bringing us to a guaranteed on average Rhino or Armiger kill. So in this context, I do think you run an Ironmaster with a 6-man unit just for those times where cover is going to come into play, and you absolutely have to make sure that your very fragile 1 activation Thunderkin unit is going to be able to reliably kill something. The last thing I just want to look at here is that if we assume the math for a 3-man unit is just simply having everything you see here on the screen, the inclusion of a character doesn't quite add enough value to things on a 3+ base save to result in a guaranteed typical vehicle being killed, which is only about 7 to 8 damage, again, if we half the amount of damage you see here on the screen. So where it says 15.55, divide that by 2, and this is for a 3-man unit being led by a character. So I do think that there isn't really much incentive or point in taking him here on a 3-man squad, as the output boost isn't quite enough to actually impact their effectiveness in terms of activation. In terms of enhancements, there's really only 2 options I could see you taking on an Ironmaster if you run him in your list with a 6-man unit of Brokhyr Thunderkin, and that would be a long list or grim demeanor. I think a long list could be interesting on an Ironmaster if you have 15 points left over to spare, simply because it is a unit that packs a ton of firepower, so if you do get to shoot at something, you should be basically guaranteed to kill it. Which means you kill something, you transfer a token over, the rest of your army could have a little bit more of a native boost against that now, because they'll be +1 to hit, or potentially +1 to hit and wound if you combo it with Appraising Glare. It loses a little bit of value in the sense that your first target you'll be shooting at with the Thunderkin unit is probably not going to be something that's judged, because in theory, if you're shooting vehicles, then you don't need any judgment tokens on it with the squad to have maximum efficiency. But let's say you need to shoot at something else instead that isn't a vehicle. So let's say it's like a unit of Terminators or Crusaders, for example, that are double judged. With the blast keyword, you're going to have a ton of shots here. Maybe you pop sustained hits too, and then you get to pick up a squad and perhaps transfer a token over to something else. Grim Demeanor is a pretty safe pick as well. I do, like I said, think I prefer it on an E-Champ with the Terminator squad, but if you did want to run 6-man Thunderkin unit instead, I do think that this would be a solid choice here. Basically allows you to ignore all modifiers, so if you're shooting at something like a Votann who has half damage, you simply ignore it. And one of the first games I played, this is not actually representative of the math, but I did shoot a full squad into a Votann with Grim Demeanor, and I killed it in 1 go, which was pretty funny. This is not average math, this is just a subjective experience, but just to show you that it is very impactful when it does work and it does go off, because it just allows you to negate anything that would otherwise hinder your output on an already very fragile unit that just wants to make sure whatever it shoots at dies. I didn't put any stratagems here on the screen because I was struggling to think of a reason why I would pop a stratagem specifically for this character, and I don't think there is any. Most of this would probably just be redundant from the Brokhyr Thunderkin video, but just so you're aware, I think Sustained Hits 2 would be a solid choice. It just really helps increase that output of the unit, especially if you're going to be hitting on 3s now, with the Ironmaster included. Potentially fallback, shoot and charge would be good as well. You just want to get out of engagement range and be able to shoot something. And in some interesting cases, if you're within range, perhaps the 2 CP be able to shoot back could have some play here, because you're going to still benefit from that +1 to hit in your shoot back moment, which means you'll be basically shooting at maximum efficiency. Alright, so in terms of some wrap-up considerations or a little summary, I do unfortunately think that this guy falls a little bit flat in his current state, and he's probably due for some love in the Codex. It's a bit underwhelming and really only benefits a single unit reliably in our roster, being the Thunderkin, and one that's already not seen by many as not being the most competitive choice available. That said, he does really help the Thunderkin gain independence from judgment tokens, which could be quite nice into vehicle-heavy lists if you do run them. That said, he does really help the Thunderkin gain independence from needing to shoot at judged targets, which could be quite nice into vehicle-heavy lists if you do run these guys. I would basically consider it an auto-include unit if you're running a 6-man brick, just because of how he helps soak 4 big damage shots that would otherwise rinse your unit. Let's say you come in from reserves, you're trying to get a shot off, somebody overwatches you with a Doomstalker, they're going to pretty reliably pick up 3 models, and those 3 models were just going to be the drones instead. So you pick up 3 ecogs, and now your unit gets a turn of full activation at full efficiency. I do think that one of his biggest drawbacks, though, is the massive footprint he adds to the Thunderkin, who already have quite a large presence on the board with their 6 bases. This can make coming in from reserves even harder if your opponent properly screens you out, as you won't be able to sneak into any small pockets that might be available. You'll also probably have a harder time hiding on the board inside of ruins or getting to ruins fully, as it could be easier for your opponent to extend line of sight to something inside of this unit through an angle on one of the bots that might have to stick out of position in order to fit where he's trying to get. I also do think that while the independence from tokens is nice, it's also kind of underwhelming because it is quite easy for your opponent mid-game to start racking up single tokens on units, especially killy vehicles. So by the time the squad gets under threat range, the +1 to hit doesn't really contribute all that much. I would personally like to see this change to either +1 BS, making the buff stack and allowing the unit to hit on 2s, or potentially having the drones in the squad provide some kind of buff for the unit, like ignore cover or like a feel no pain. I think this could be a really fun way of having the units start at maximum efficiency, but slowly degrading and losing benefits as you begin allocating wounds over to the drones instead, thereby removing your active buff source. It can make for some really interesting decisions between allocating wounds to your Thunderkin instead of the drones, hoping that the feel no pain keeps the model alive long enough so that you retain ignore cover, and then you get to heal it back up to full with the Ironmaster himself on your movement phase. Ultimately, I think there's a lot of design space to revamp the Brokhyr line as a whole with the Codex, which could give us some really interesting units to play with. Alright guys, as always, if you enjoyed this video and kind of content, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment for me down below. What do you guys think about the Ironmaster? What changes would you like to see for this creative mastermind in our future codex? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.